Good evening, Bahamas. Coming up tonight in our news.
The Court of Appeal hands down a ruling in the murder of a police officer.
Is purchasing a home out of pocket a viable option? We have the public's response straight ahead.
Our news is brought to you by Alive.
Welcome to our news and thanks for joining us. I'm Jared Higgs. Topping news tonight, one accused cop killer set free by the Court of Appeal this afternoon and the convictions of his two co-accused upheld. After a nearly 4-hour late start, the appellate court quashed the murder conviction of Clinton Russ Evans while upholding the convictions of Stephen Dye Stubbs and Andrew Yogi Davis for the 1999 murder of DC Jimmy Ambrose. Jasmine Brown was in court and filed this report.
The trio was back in court today, but not after a very long wait. In fact, it took officers 4 hours to bring them to court. Court of Appeal President Sir Hartman Longley and acting Justices of Appeal Sir Michael Barnett and Milton Evans didn't reveal their decision on the appeal of Stephen Dye Stubbs, Andrew Yogi Davis, and Clinton Russ Evans until 1:15 p.m., although the hearing was scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. That's because the men are not transported to court with the general prison population and are brought by SWAT officers. The men arrived at court under heavy police guard as nearly a dozen heavily armed police officers watched over a crowd of curious onlookers and family and friends. Stubbs and Davis, seen here in the pink shirt, as well as Evans, seen here in the blue shirt, were challenging their convictions on the grounds that the trial judge admitted various pieces of hearsay evidence, allowed doc identifications, and gave inadequate directions in relation to identification evidence, among other things. They were also contesting the constitutionality of their life sentences. While in its ruling, the Court of Appeal dismissed Stubbs and Davis' appeal against their conviction for the offenses of murder and attempted murder. They also quashed both men's life sentence and imposed a lesser sentence of 45 years imprisonment. Based on time both men have already served, Stubbs will serve out another 35 years in prison and Davis another 34 years. Though they could serve less time with good behavior. As it relates to Evans, his appeals were allowed and his conviction and sentence were set aside and no retrial ordered. In his written ruling, the Court of Appeal president noted that he disagreed with the decision not to order a retrial. Sir Hartman stated that there is no question in his judgment that the role Evans played in the killing of Officer Ambrose is substantial. He went on to say the interests of justice to be served are the interests of the Bahamian people, the interests of the Bahamas. The primary interest of justice for Bahamians is that those guilty of serious crime should not go free. The majority say that this was just an ordinary case of murder, that Evans did not know that the person killed was a police officer. The reality is that the shooter that night did not care about such particulars. In my judgment, this was no ordinary crime. This was no ordinary murder. This was a public killing of a police officer in the discharge of his duties to detect and investigate crime. Longley's written statement went on to ask, does it matter whether the evidence discloses that none of the three men who trained their guns on the deceased knew that he was a police officer? If indeed that were the case, that may be a matter for sentencing, but certainly should not influence the decision as to whether it is in the interest of justice to order a retrial. It is mind-boggling to me that the majority would say that the fact that Ambrose was a police officer is an immaterial consideration. Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions Neil Brathwaite and Destiny McKinney appeared for the Crown. Ian Cargill appeared for Davis, Ramona Farquharson Seymour appeared for Evans, and Stubbs is represented by Mario DeSeal and Edward Fitzgerald QC. Reporting for our news, I'm Jasmine Brown.
Centerville MP Reece Chipman announced his resignation from the Public Accounts Committee on Wednesday afternoon. In a scathing letter, Chipman blasted parliamentary committees, accusing them of failing to provide even a single report to the House of Assembly.
I would like to table my letter of resignation from the Public Accounts Committee with immediate effect.
Chipman's resignation letter partly states that in light of the absence of a House-approved terms of reference for the Public Accounts Committee and the fact that the member for Killarney and the Prime Minister of the Bahamas has publicly called the Public Accounts Committee functionless, I hereby submit my resignation letter effective immediately.
It needs to be tabled because it needs to be on record as to the reasons for the resignation. I think it's important for the future generations of this country.
Chipman also blasted the House's other committees, saying there were absolutely no committee reports to the House of Assembly of the Bahamas since the FNM took office. In addition, the Centreville MP criticized a lack of clarity in the rules of the House of Assembly, which he says are still not formalized or formally adopted by the House. He added that time and time again, parliamentarians have referred to various rule books, and a follow-up committee that was announced to correct this has revealed nothing further. The Public Accounts Committee consists of 5 members, the majority of whom must be from the opposition. Its members include Golden Gates MP Michael Folks, Exuma's and Ragged Island MP Chester Cooper, Mangrove Key and South Andros MP Picewell Forbes, and its chairman, Cat Island, Rum Key and San Salvador MP Philip Brave Davis.
You ought not to abandon that ship.
While Davis commended Chipman's move, he says the Centreville MP has put himself in a curious dilemma.
Having denounced his party and government, and having denounced and condemned the parliament, then what is the next step going forward?
The opposition leader acknowledged that standing committees of successive parliaments have developed a certain culture, while insisting that Chipman should have stuck with the committee to help promote change.
Very rarely you will find that the standing committees produce reports. That is something that needs to be addressed, not by removing yourself, but by being a part of it to ensure that something happens.
Chipman was the chairman of the Antiquities, Monuments and Museums Corporation until he was fired by Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis nearly 1 year ago. Minnis never disclosed his reason for axing Chipman. Minister of State for Legal Affairs, Ellsworth Johnson, said Bahamians should never go to a bank to cover the cost of building a home. Instead, he says banks should be reserved for more significant investment. Well, our Jillian Gray took to the streets to see if Bahamians agree with that suggestion.
Purchasing a home is arguably one of the top priorities for Bahamians. But while on his feet yesterday, Minister for Legal Affairs Ellsworth Johnson sought to give a bit of advice in this area, telling Bahamians that if they want to build or buy, they should not go to a financial institution.
If I had it to do again, and I do have it to do again, never go to a bank unless it's for the purpose of an investment, a significant investment, not to purchase a home. You could build that.
Last year, under the Access to Affordable Homes bill, the government began offering service lots for under $30,000. On Wednesday, the government began debate in the House of Assembly on a resolution for the conveyance of 1.2 acres of land in the Fox Hill community, furthering their affordable homes program. Well, we took to the streets today to see if Bahamians believe that purchasing out of pocket is a viable option.
No, ma'am, that don't make no sense. Because if you find, say you give them $30,000, right? For one little piece of property, that even 50 by 100, you get that. You still have to go look for money for contractors. You have to go get money to buy the blocks and everything, dig the foundation. That ain't making no sense.
That is not practical because the average payment have less than $1,000 in their savings account. And if you're going to build out of pocket, and it's going to take you 15 to 20 years to build a house, it's going to be costly.
Though many disagree, we found a 32-year-old male who said he does actually want to build out of pocket.
I would personally rather build out of pocket. I find it would be cheaper, but most persons don't have the resources or the know-how to source those means.
For those who may be cash-strapped and can't build on their own, the Legal Affairs Minister suggested that phoning a friend may be the lifeline to get the job done. Johnson said young professionals should pool their resources, stating that friends are not just there to talk nonsense.
Your friends in more debt than you. We can start with Parliament. Most of them are dead. Just start there. They can't even build a house in there. Ask them how they build. They got rich. So that can't wait.
Because you don't know what the other party's commitments are. And asking them to assist one person, who's going to assist them?
Although some slammed it as a bad idea, others say it's not so ludicrous.
We as a people, if we work together, we could get a lot more accomplished. So in a sense, that can actually work. But I don't know if we as people trust one another and work together well.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Jillian Gray.
Opposition leader Philip Davis is slamming Tourism Minister Dionisio de Aguilar, who said the government was right to slim down the public sector. De Aguilar was responding to the recent jobs figures, which showed an increase in entrepreneurs and hiring in the private sector. Well, Davis says those comments were callous, as it's never a good thing to terminate employees.
To gloat over terminating persons in the public service. Now we're talking about the public service, and if you look at the demographic of those that were let go, they were those who were on minimum wage. And to say that the private sector is picking them up is, again, we need to see the hard evidence.
Despite the gains in employment in the tourism industry, the numbers show an increase in unemployment overall. Davis said the government is simply not doing enough to combat unemployment numbers.
The numbers speak to my mind is that this government is not growing the economy fast enough. There's still not enough initiatives to us to make what I call a meaningful assault on the unemployment numbers. More particularly, what is damning is the fact that our young females are the ones who seem to be the victims of this unemployment scourge that's attending our economy.
Davis said despite the government's gloating, he does not see where new jobs were created and sees very little prospect for job growth in 2019.
The only prospect is, again, the point is being the construction of point. If that finishes on time, that might add opportunities for jobs. But apart from that, I've seen no plan or initiatives by the government from which there can be hope for new job creation.
So to come on our news, JCNP officials say don't expect any date changes for the major Junkanoo parades.